But what I'm going to try and do tonight is just give you a glimpse of some of the technological changes that I've seen in my professional career in terms of how they've transformed journalism, and then have a little look at how they're changing the world of books and reading, the very essence of this place. And my message, I hope, will be a reasonably optimistic one. So if I go back to the beginning of my career, believe it or not, who's that? Anyone recognise him? Richard Baker, yeah. When I first started, and I started as in Leeds, but then I quickly went to the television centre in London, where the main television newsroom was, as a very junior sub-editor, we were called in those days. And I arrived on the day Richard Baker, who sort of is the old face of television news, was reading his last ever news bulletin. So that's when I really started. And it was a very old technology world. So in Leeds, where I'd just come from, we had shot everything on film, and that film had to go through processing. It's in the bath, people used to say, because that was the term for the film processing unit, and then was cut up and reassembled by a film editor. We bashed out the scripts on ancient typewriters in a smug of cigarette smoke, while a hard-drinking news editor shouted at us before popping downstairs to the bar for a couple of pints of Tetleys at lunchtime. So it was a sort of typical old newsroom. The London newsroom, by the time I got there, was not that different. Yes, they'd just moved from film to tape. Next picture. Actually, of course, this is a complete nonsense. I think this is probably about 1960. But anyway, the technology was pretty old. They had moved from film to tape, to big chunky videotape, but with great suspicion. And there was a huge battery of technicians involved in every step of putting together a news piece. So people like him, slightly, you know, the sports jackets had been slightly updated by then. But there were people to... so if we think of a typical news story in those days, there would be a cameraman, a sound man, and probably a lighting man, a three-man crew. And I say man with some justification because women had really yet to break through into that area. There were telecine operators, there were VT machine operators, there were VT, videotape that is, 2-inch tape operators and 3/4 inch. There were different grades of tape editors and operators for each stage of the system. So a hugely expensive and but also a very skilled operation. And the newsroom was peopled by elderly men in cardigans who dictated their scripts to middle-aged ladies in twin sets. That's how it seems to me. Who tapped them out on electric typewriters. There were no computers, of course, in those days. A couple of years after my arrival, though, I was asked to take part in a strike. We were heavily unionised. We still are quite unionised. And the strike was over a really serious issue. They wanted, I know, you brace yourselves for this, they wanted to bring computers into the newsroom. And so I found myself turning up at work to be suspended by the editor, because this is what we had to do. We had to turn up and say, he said, will you work with computers? And I had to say no. So my first encounter with computers in a professional capacity was to go on strike over them. We wanted to be paid a bit more. One senior news editor even threatened to throw the first computer out of the 6th floor window of the newsroom when it arrived. So we did get computers. So actually, that's not the first computer to arrive in the BBC newsroom. That is a sort of typical journalist of the time when I started. Yeah, there is. Did you notice a fancy move there, by the way? Yeah. Sorry, I just I enjoyed that. Oh, no, going back. back. Sorry. I just wanted you to enjoy that move again. Let's just have another go at it. A cube wipe. Yeah, lovely. Now this, the first computers in the newsroom were very, very simple. They weren't quite that simple, I have to say. Anyone recognise that? Enigma. That's Enigma from Bletchley Park, actually. Yeah. It was called Basis, and it was incredibly simple, but it worked rather well. Anyway, over the last 20 years, we did finally get computerized, and there has, of course, been a digital revolution, which has swept away many of those different crafts, those different characters which peopled newsrooms. And nowadays, one person, and this is one of them, does just about all of those different jobs that I was talking about. So this is a cameraman I work with sometimes, and he's both an experienced cameraman, he does the sound himself now, if a light needs putting up, he puts the light up, he can edit, and he edits on a laptop. It's a digital process, and whereas we used to, even 2 or 3 years ago, always go to either the local TV link or have a satellite truck parked by us, nowadays when I go on a story with this guy, we sit in a hotel room and knock the thing together and then pray that the hotel Wi-Fi works and send it back over the Wi-Fi to London. Now, so there's been a huge change in the technology we apply in all of these areas. And we can go live from just about anywhere, and we can do it with far fewer people. And whatever the people I used to work with in the 80s might tell you about falling standards and how, you know, there was a golden age back then, they're actually talking nonsense most of the time. Sometimes I give talks to journalism students at the Cardiff School of Journalism, and I show them some television news reports from the late 80s, early 90s, and they're aghast at how poor the quality is and how unengaging the journalism is. This technological revolution that's swept through TV news has had its costs in terms of the people. But don't believe those who tell you that that was a golden age and this is not.